Good afternoon, and thank you for the honour and the opportunity to speak to you at this important and historic event. When I was elected to chair the British Parliamentary Committee Against Anti-Semitism, I decided to seek wise counsel on how to do the role. And one of the first people that I called on was Tom Lantos. And it was my only meeting with him. And as I sat in his grand office in Washington, he asked who I was and why I was there. And I explained that I'd come to learn from him. And he looked at me and he said, "Mr. Mann, I would not have agreed this meeting for that purpose. This meeting is for me to learn from you." And as I sat puzzling, he continued, "The fight against anti-Semitism will not be won by discussing what you have done. It'll be won by discussing what you will do." And I've remembered that overly modest but wise advice as my committee, and we now have an international parliamentary coalition, has received awards and plaudits for our great work. And then I look and I see what is happening in Europe and across the world, not yesterday or the day before, but today. And I realize that our work is not succeeding, that our work is not concluded, that our work has hardly begun. And the approach that we take, let me just read, and this is on the internet, the whole declaration that we agreed at the inaugural international conference in London, reaffirmed at the second international conference in Ottawa, Canada. But the first two challenges to parliamentarians. Number one, parliamentarians shall expose, challenge, and isolate political actors who engage in hate against Jews and target the State of Israel as a Jewish collectivity. And number two, parliamentarians should speak out against anti-Semitism and discrimination directed against any minority and guard against equivocation, hesitation, and justification in the face of expressions of hatred. And our approach is to ask each parliament to take responsibility for itself, for its government, for its people, and their language and their actions, their behaviour. And so we've established groups in parliaments, conferences of parliaments across the world. I'm pleased to say that very recently the first Parliamentary Committee Against Anti-Semitism in Africa has been formed by parliamentarians in the Rwanda Parliament. And in the last year, we've made real, a full and effective, across the political divide, multinational group in the European Parliament to combat the scourge of anti-Semitism. And I would hope that one consideration following this historic conference is that those in the Hungarian Parliament contemplate how best they can take forward this battle. And why parliaments? We have governments, we have brilliant institutions, we have community organisations. Well, I'll tell you why Parliament must take the lead. We must take the lead because we're elected as the political leaders, for better and for worse, in each democratic state. It's our duty and it's our responsibility. And the easy thing is to point fingers at problems elsewhere. And of course, and I was in Hungary, in major events with the media and politicians last year, it's right and proper that we should make observations, we should lend support, we should develop work across borders. But my primary responsibility will always have to be my country, my parliament, to ensure that we do not relent. And even today as we speak, one of our members of parliament has over recent months been suspended for making offensive, inappropriate comments beyond what is acceptable when it comes to the discourse and language of anti-Semitism. And therefore, that is a message I hope will be taken to heart by all parliamentarians, that we sort out first and foremost our own problems, rather than simply looking for others who we say have worse problems than us. And why is that? I'll tell you why. Because we should see anti-Semitism as the doctor sees influenza. The germ of influenza is always there. And when there's a major outbreak, we're all worried. But if we're sensible, we immunize against it. And when it breaks down, the doctors move and they clamp down to ensure it spreads no further and the patient can be cured of their illness. Well, in exactly the same way as the doctor deals with influenza, then we, the parliamentarians, have to deal with the scourge of anti-Semitism whenever, wherever it breaks out. And therefore, I hope that this wonderful conference in this incredible building in this great country, to quote a much more famous politician than any here today, but this must not be the beginning of the end in tackling anti-Semitism in this country. This must be the end of the beginning in fighting back against it. And I will leave you picking up from what Ira Foreman said earlier about the real situation across Europe and about the problem that we have failed to address. Because when young Jewish kids in so-called advanced, developed, mature democracies who read and are educated about the history of their continent cannot go about their everyday life, such as travelling to school, in the way that they choose, and instead have to wear baseball caps to ensure that they are not attacked on the way to school, not in one country, but in many countries across Europe. Young people in our continent, in this millennium today, then we, the parliamentarians in all the countries, have not been doing our job properly, and we should hold ourselves to account in ensuring every parliament takes a lead, every parliamentarian is held to account, and all of us fight against the scourge of anti-Semitism. And we look forward, from my committee internationally, to working with this Parliament in Hungary to ensure that we can work with you, you can play your role, and we can play ours. Thank you very much for inviting me.